Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of digital fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and today is day 3 of spoiler season for Aether Drift. We have a bunch of crazy new cards I want to get through. Before we do that, please like the video. It helps me get it out to so many more people, and I appreciate it more than words. Also, subscribe if you're new so you never miss an upload. Tons of crazy content on the way, and catch me live Monday through Friday over on Twitch. That's twitch.tv/quarantinedcapricorn, because if I'm alive and I'm breathing, I'm there and I'm streaming. In fact, if you're seeing this right when it goes up, it is community night, and you can pop on over on Twitch and play me in games of MTG Arena, so I hope to see you there. But with all of that out of the way, let's check out these cards. First off, we have Aether Siphon. This is an artifact for 2 blue and 1. It has start your engines, so it'll start you up at speed 1, and for every single one of your turns in which your opponent loses life, you'll get to increase that speed by 1. And when you hit 4, that's considered max speed, so you'll be at max speed if you get to a speed of 4. It also has the ability to pay 2 mana, tap, and draw a card. But the real kicker here is when you reach max speed, whenever you draw a card, each opponent mills 2 cards. Honestly, paying 5 mana to draw 1 card is kind of a lot, so I think the draw card for 2 mana is just sort of gravy. But that being said, if you can get to max speed easily and then drop this and just every single time you draw mill 2 cards, that could be the backbone of some kind of crazy new mill deck in Standard. It does seem like it's a bit slow to me, so I don't necessarily think that's gonna happen. But at the very least, this could be an archetype within Limited where you can just mill your opponent out super easily, super efficiently, and that's kind of exciting, so we'll have to explore it. But next up, we've got Defend the Rider. 1 green for an instant, and you choose one. Target permanent you control gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Or you make a 1/1 token that counts as a pilot, and so it can mount and crew things for, as if its power were 2 greater, which is nice. I like the versatility here. Having your 1 mana instant that protects your dude is kind of a staple. You get a spell like that within every set, but having it be versatile and having it be something that can provide you board presence if you don't need the protection is kind of nice, especially at instant speed. That's the part you don't want to overlook. It's not just a 1/1 that can mount and crew things easier. It's also a 1/1 that can mount and crew things easier that's flash, in a way. So, pretty cool. You could just pop this out when your opponent doesn't see it coming and crew a blocker and sort of blow them out in combat that way, which is really interesting. So, I'm excited to see just how crazy this ends up being in Limited. But next up, we've got Goblin Surveyor. This is a 3/2 Goblin Scout with Trample for 1 red and 2. It has Start Your Engines, so if you haven't already, it'll put you at speed 1, with max speed being 4. And at max speed, you can pay 3 mana and exile this from your graveyard to draw a card. I actually like this a lot because the ability works from your graveyard. You're not in a rush to get there. You just play some board presence, maybe you get in for some damage, it eventually trades or eats removal, and then it just sits there. And then at some point during the game, if you manage to get your speed up to max speed, all of a sudden this just turns on in the graveyard, and it's just free card advantage from the grave. I think that makes this pretty good for a common, pretty high pick, I think, for Limited, honestly. Just because it gives you that card advantage automatically without having to worry about getting that card advantage while it's still in play, which I really love. But next up, we've got Mindspring Merfolk, our first rare of the day. This is a 1/1 Merfolk wizard for just 1 blue mana, and it has an exhaust ability. You can pay 2 blue and X and tap it, but only once in the entire game, because that's what exhaust is. And you draw X cards, but then put a +1/+1 counter on each Merfolk creature you control. That's actually an insane ability on just a 1-drop. This thing just comes out and sits there, and your opponent doesn't want to waste their removal on it, but then eventually it just gasses you up to an insane degree, and you don't have to use this ability at sorcery speed or anything like that. You can use it at instant speed. So if you're playing some kind of a control deck where you're holding up the ability to counterspell things or play things at instant speed, and then they decide to try and kill this, you could just respond by using the exhaust ability and drawing a bunch of cards and buffing up your team of Merfolks. I think Merfolk Tribal is actually poised to make a pretty big splash, pun intended, in Standard already, and it seems to be getting a lot of crazy Merfolk support in this set, so I'm excited to brew Merfolk. I'm even more excited to try this with something like Agatha's Soul Cauldron, which I will probably never stop gushing about in conjunction with exhaust abilities. Just, you know, this gets in the graveyard, you exile it, now every single creature you have with a counter on it has this ability. Almost makes the exhaust not matter, which is kind of insane. So lots of cool ways to use this, but if you have any ways I haven't listed here, definitely let me know in the comments. Next up, we've got Brightfield Mustang. This is 1 white and 3 for a 3/3 horse mount. You can saddle it for just 1, and whenever this creature attacks while saddled, you untap it and put a +1/+1 counter on it. So as long as you have any other creature that you can saddle this with, it's swinging its first time as a 4/4 Vigilance, basically. And then still there to block when your opponent swings next turn, which is kind of powerful for a common. And the fact that it can just kind of ramp up from there, get more and more counters every single turn, and become a very sizable threat, and all you have to commit is just one of your crappy little 1/1 tokens or whatever. I kind of love that. Brightfield Mustang, I think, is going to be one of those sleeper cards in Limited. Now, it's definitely too expensive to use in Constructed, but in Limited, I do think it's going to be a solid pick, and yeah, I think it's a prime candidate to be like a sleeper card within the Limited format. Next up, we have Momentum Breaker. This will not be limited to just the Limited format. This is probably the best uncommon we've seen so far. This is 1 black and 1 for an enchantment. You start your engines when you play it, if you haven't already, and when this enchantment enters, each opponent sacrifices a creature or vehicle of their choice, but each opponent who can't discards a card. Then, at any time, you can pay 2 mana and sacrifice this enchantment to gain life equal to your speed. I kind of love this. This is sort of like a Hopeless Nightmare mashed together with, what's the one artifact there that makes an opponent sacrifice? Oh, I forget the name off the top of my head, but there's a 2-drop artifact that has a similar effect to this. This card in particular is just strictly better than that, because if they don't have anything in play that you want them to sacrifice, it's not a dead card. You can still play this, still make them discard a card, and still start your engines if you need to do that, and still have access to gaining up to 4 life at some point later in the game when you sacrifice this, depending on how much speed you have. All of that is amazing. I think this is a prime candidate to be included in nurturing pixie decks moving forward. Like I said, the versatility of being able to get rid of their board presence or hit a card in their hand if they don't have any, and being able to potentially get up to 4 life out of this against aggro decks is all kind of nuts. It's also nice to note that this is an enchantment, so you can take it even further with enchantment synergies, triggering things like 𝐒𝐿, and all sorts of stuff like that. So I just think Momentum Breaker is absolutely insane. I think it's absolutely going to see play in Standard, and it's going to be a pretty high pick in Limited as well. This card is just nuts. This is one of those cards that I see and I don't know what they were thinking. It seems super pushed. Like, you could take away any one of these abilities and it would still be a good card. So the fact that it has all of this built in, it's just kind of insane. But we're going to move on. Next up, we've got Marshals Pathcruiser. This is a 6/5 artifact vehicle for just 3 mana. And when it enters, you search your library for a basic land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. It crews for a whopping 5, but it also has an exhaust ability. You can pay a WUBRG, 1 mana of each color, so a total of 5 mana. And this vehicle becomes an artifact creature. You put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Yeah, so it's just an 8/7, just for 5 mana. If you have all colors, it just becomes an 8/7 for the rest of the game. I think all of this taken into consideration, this card is actually kind of nuts. Specifically in Limited, it's still probably too expensive for Standard or any kind of Constructed, but in Limited, you have a colorless way to mana fix for any color at all by finding whatever basic you need. And it gives you board presence that you can use in the meantime by crewing it. And granted, it takes a whopping 5 power to crew it, but still, extra value on top of finding that land is super nice. And then it gets even crazier later. If you happen to get to that WUBRG, you can just turn it into a creature and never have to worry about crewing it again. So I love how it has immediate value, some maybe value in the midterm, and then possibly some crazy value in the late game. Kind of ticks off all of those boxes for me. And I really, really love this in Limited. Still probably too slow for Constructed, but in Limited, this thing's going to be bananas. Next up, we've got Unswerving Sloth. This is a 5/5 Sloth mount for 2 white and 3. It saddles for a whopping 4, which is a lot, but whenever this creature attacks while saddled, it gains indestructible until end of turn, and you untap all creatures you control. That seems crazy. Like, saddle 4 is a lot, but being able to swing with an indestructible every single turn, and making all of your other creatures untap is not just all your other creatures, this as well, right? This will untap and still be a blocker for you, although it won't be able to block with indestructible because you can only saddle on your own turn as a sorcery. So that's something to keep in mind. Whereas with the vehicles with crew, you can use them as blockers. While crewing them, you can't saddle and use them as blockers. So this can still be a 5/5 blocker after you swing with it, but you're not going to be able to give it indestructible when blocking. That being said, it just does a lot, honestly, as an uncommon. Just untaps your whole board, swings in willy-nilly. Even if you don't want to swing in with anything else, you can use other creatures' tap abilities to get value. Swing in with this after saddling it with indestructible, and then untap them all. And another thing to point out about it is whatever you tap to saddle this thing will also untap when it attacks. So as long as they're creatures that you don't want to attack with also, using them to saddle it is kind of free, and then you untap them and have them as blockers or have them as creatures that can use their tap abilities and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of different little negligible ways in which this card is super valuable, and I think it's actually going to be a high pick in Limited for sure. But next up we have Thopter Fabricator. This is another rare. It is a 4/4 artifact vehicle with flying for 1 blue and 2. It crews for 2, and whenever you draw your second card each turn, you create a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying. I kind of love the flavor of this card, that there's a bunch of Thopter mechanics within this set, specifically because the Thopters are the cameras that are filming the race, which is kind of interesting. But I love that this is just, as long as you're playing this correctly, this is spitting out a free 1/1 flyer every turn, and not only that, but it's spitting out an artifact every turn. So even if you're in a deck that just wants to go wide with as many artifacts as possible, as quickly as possible, this can just spit out an extra token every single turn. And it can activate during your opponent's turn if you have a way to draw 2 cards during your opponent's turn. So that's not nothing either. And then even just swinging in for 4 every single turn with a flyer for a somewhat low crew cost of only 2 seems pretty decent. So I feel like this is one of those cards that the sum is greater, you know, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It's really every part of the card working in conjunction that really makes it great. And in fact, once you get to the point where you've spit out at least 2 Thopters, it can kind of crew itself with the Thopters that it's made, and it kind of becomes self-sufficient, which I really like about it. So I think this card is pretty cool. But next up, we've got Autarch Mammoth. This is a 5/5 elephant mount with a saddle 5 for 2 green and 4. That's actually super expensive, so the other ability better be damn good. When this creature enters and whenever it attacks while saddled, you create a 3/3 green elephant creature token. Okay, now we're talking. So you get a 5/5 and a 3/3 for 6 mana, and then you can use that 3/3 to help saddle this when you attack, which means you only have to tap another 2 power worth of creatures in order to get it fully saddled, and then it just makes another 3/3 when it swings. And then at that point, you have 2 3/3s if you wanted to. Both of those could saddle this, and it could just be self-sufficient and start spitting out a 3/3 every turn. I actually think that's pretty good. Honestly, for an uncommon, the fact that you get 2 bodies immediately so that even if they have removal, you have value left over, and then it has the potential to spit out a body every single turn. The more I think about this, the more I like this card. I don't necessarily think this is an insanely high pick in Limited because it is kind of expensive, But I wouldn't be surprised if every green deck tries to at least wind up with one of these in their deck at the top end, especially if you're in a deck that's trying to focus on, you know, mounts and vehicles and that sort of thing with extra value, extra synergies that you can add to those types of creatures. So, pretty cool card here. But next up, we've got Cloudspire Captain. This is 1 white and 2 for a 2/3 human pilot. It gives mounts and vehicles you control +1/+1. Which, it's nice, having a Lord ability for, you know, mounts and vehicles is kind of awesome. 3 mana does seem a little bit overcosted, but it also saddles mounts and crews vehicles as though its power were 2 greater, which is not nothing. This means you can basically saddle or crew something that has a mount 4, a saddle 4 cost, or a crew 4 cost, which kind of lines up perfectly. We already have Seraphic Steed in standard. That can come down on turn 2. This can immediately mount that thing, saddle it on turn 3, and have it swing with a +1/+1 buff. So it swings as what? A 3/3 first striking lifelink that makes a 3/3 flyer when you swing. That's a lot, honestly, for turn 3. So I don't know if this is competitively costed enough to actually see play in standard, but at least that play line alone makes it considerable. And I think at least in limited, this is going to be insanely good, but it gets better the more things that have mount or crew 4. If you have things with mount or crew 3 that don't get the full value off of the Cloudspire Captain, he doesn't quite get pushed to his full limits. But if we have some pretty insane cards that can mount and crew for 4 that will be available to us in limited, this could end up being absolutely bananas in limited. As it stands right now, it's still at least good if you're in a deck that's focused on mounts or vehicles or both. And that's good enough for sure for it to be absolutely playable, a decent pick, but it could end up being as high as a first pick depending on how many really good saddle and crew 4 cards that we have in this set. Next up, we've got Molt Tender, probably my pick for second most powerful uncommon in this set, at least thus far. This is a 1/1 creature insect druid for just 1 green mana. You can tap it to mill a card, but you can also tap it and exile a card from your graveyard to add a mana of any color. This is bananas in Insidious Roots decks, or really in any deck where you want to be exiling your own cards. Getting basically a Birds of Paradise on turn 1 that also triggers its roots when you use it and gives you a token seems crazy by itself. The fact that it can also be used to tap and mill a card if you don't need the mana, or if you don't have cards that you really want to exile from your graveyard, to just, you know, dig into those synergies even deeper, fill up your graveyard with things that you need. You're obviously only going to use this in a deck that is trying to fill up your graveyard with self-mill and stuff like that. So being able to contribute to those synergies even on turns where you don't need the mana, or, you know, don't want to exile things, is really awesome gravy. But man, a Birds of Paradise that can trigger all of your exile stuff when you use it is actually kind of nuts. So I am 100% going to build a new version of Roots with this, and there might even be some other exile decks coming down the line that this fits into really nicely. We saw that the Orzhov God a couple days ago that gives you value, lets you draw a card every time you exile something from a graveyard or from the battlefield. This could be insane with that. Draw a card and add a mana of any color, like, sure. I don't know. The more I think about this card, the more crazy it gets. I love this card. And then in limited, it's a slam dunk. It's a 1 mana dork. Granted, it's a little bit harder in limited. You're not going to have as many ways to consistently fill up your graveyard. But again, being able to mill your own cards with this so you have something to use to generate mana is nice as well. And I'm sure there will be some kind of archetype in limited that wants to put things in the graveyard anyway, and this will help with that for sure. But next up, we've got Wreck Remover. This is a 4 mana 3/4 artifact creature construct. When it enters or attacks, you get to exile a card from a graveyard and gain a life, which is honestly some nice value for a colorless uncommon. Or is it common? I think it's a common. Obviously, this isn't costed too competitively. 4 is a lot, but you can also cycle this for 2. So even if you don't need it, if you top deck it later in the game and the body's not going to do enough for you, you can cycle it away, dig a little deeper, draw another card. Or, you know, early in the game, if you don't have enough lands to get to 4, you're stuck on lands, you can also cycle this and dig 1 card closer to your land. So there's versatility there. You know, a cycling cost like this that's cheap and colorless is nothing to scoff at, especially because we've already seen some mechanics in this set that care about you discarding things, and if you cycle this, you're going to trigger that. But even if you're just playing it as a body, and you get this, like, silver lining way to exile stuff from graveyards and gain incremental life, that's not nothing. So, I think this is decent. 4 mana is still a lot, but I think it's decent. Next up, we've got March of the World Ooze. This is a mythic. It's an enchantment for 3 green and 3, which is a lot, but it does a lot. First of all, whenever an opponent casts a spell, if it's not their turn, you get to create a 3/3 green elephant creature token, which is already kind of bananas, to be completely honest. Just make a 3/3 every single turn. But wait, there's more. Creatures you control have base power and toughness 6/6 and are oozes in addition to their other types. So not only is this thing spitting out 3/3 elephants every single time your opponent tries to cast a spell on your turn, but they're not 3/3s, they're 6/6s and count as oozes, plus all of your other creatures become 6/6 oozes as well. Which means if you're playing something like incubation tokens that are 0/0 creatures that have +1/+1 counters on them, they get way more powerful because they become base power and toughness 6/6 and still have all of the +1/+1 counters on them so that they're even bigger. Plus everything's in ooze, so maybe there's like some crazy ooze tribal shenanigans down the line that we can do. But the card I'm most interested in brewing with this is Abuelo's Awakening? Abuelo's Awakening, yeah. Because for only 4 mana, you could actually return this to the battlefield as a 1/1 spirit if it's in your graveyard, and then it turns itself into a 6/6 ooze. So you get, for 4 mana, a 6/6 flying ooze that turns everything else on your board into 6/6 oozes, and spits out other 6/6 oozes every time your opponent tries to play a card on your turn, which means even if they try to kill your March of the World Ooze because now it's a creature, they at least give you a 6/6, which immediately becomes a 3/3 when the March dies, but you get something for your trouble, which is kind of awesome, and then maybe you can just bring it back again. I don't know. It seems like there's definitely something there to explore, but we're going to have to test it before we really figure out exactly how usable this is. It is a bit expensive, but the potential is kind of through the roof. Next up, we've got Spotcycle Scouter. This is a 3/2 artifact vehicle for 1 white and 1. When it enters, you get to scry 2, and then it crews for just 1. It's actually a really good common. The scry 2 is going to help a lot of times to find, you know, maybe your missing color of mana, to dig deeper into your deck and find your missing drops that you need to curve out with, stuff like that. Scry 2 is actually really powerful on, you know, a cheap, efficient permanent like this that's getting you extra value alongside it. So having a 3/2, you know, vehicle that crews for just 1 and gives you this automatic, you know, value as soon as it enters is not nothing. Should be pretty interesting in Limited, especially in the decks that have a lot of vehicle synergies where you can get more out of this card because of ways that it synergizes with other cards in the deck. I really expect this to be kind of a staple in decks like that. But next up, we've got Pedal to the Metal. 1 red and X for an instant. Target creature gets +X/+0 and gains first strike until end of turn. This is just a very standard combat trick, right? Giving your dude first strike when your opponent doesn't expect it means you're going to win combat, you're probably going to kill their guy, and you're going to survive. But getting to buff your dude up however much you need to in order to make that happen, having it be scalable, is pretty nice. And it also kind of doubles as a finisher, because if they don't block your guy and you have a ton of mana, you just buff it to high hell and just kill them outright, which seems kind of nice. So Pedal to the Metal, nothing too exciting, but definitely usable. Next up, we've got Boom Scholar. This is a 3/3 Goblin Advisor. Exhaust abilities of other permanents you control cost 2 less to activate, and he costs 3 mana himself in the colors of Gruul. Has an exhaust ability. You pay 1 green, 1 red, and 4. creatures and vehicles you control gain trample until end of turn, and you put 2 +1/+1 counters on this creature. I actually really like this, especially if you're in a deck that's using a ton of exhaust. It obviously gets way better. But even just getting a 3/3 for 3 that eventually at some point when you have enough mana becomes a 5/5 and gives you a little bit of extra value alongside that, giving everything trample until end of turn, sort of acts like a pseudo overrun in a way. You only get the counters on this creature, not every creature, but still giving out that trample to everything does help you kind of alpha strike. But really where this guy's going to see the most play is in those decks that are using a ton of exhaust abilities, and that makes me think that maybe Gruul is the color combination that has the most exhaust abilities, where you can use this the most efficiently and the most consistently. It's exciting to see where that archetype goes in Limited for sure. But next up we've got Greasewrench Goblin. This is a 2/1 Goblin Artificer for just 1 red mana, so it's already pretty decent, right? An aggressive turn 1 play for goblins as long as it has some extra value. And it does. It has an exhaust ability, 1 red and 2, discard up to 2 cards, draw that many cards, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. I kind of love this. It might be a little too expensive for standard, but it might not. If a goblin deck actually ends up being a real thing, getting a 2/1 for 1 that can get you this kind of value later on is not nothing. 3 mana to ditch like 2 lands that you don't need and draw 2 actual relevant cards at the point in the game when you're out of gas could be worth doing, especially if you have ways of, you know, reducing that exhaust cost like the card we just saw previously, or maybe some other ways like Training Grounds. That's probably getting too much in the weeds because you want this to be in an aggro deck, right? So you don't want to gum up your board by playing like Training Grounds, waste your tempo, that kind of thing. But still, I think it is possible for goblins to be a thing, and it is possible, if goblins are a thing, for this to be a part of that deck just because it helps you when you kind of run out of gas, and it also puts a counter on itself when you do it. So it ends up becoming a 3/2. So it's not like that 3 mana is not hitting the board at all. You are getting some board presence out of this, turning this into a more reasonable threat. I don't know. The more I think about it, the more I think this might be a little too slow for a deck like that, but it's still possible. Just the fact that it's a 2/1 goblin for 1 and can pick up all of whatever goblin synergies there might be in a goblin tribal deck does make it at least considerable. I think in Limited, this guy is a slam dunk. Getting an aggressive threat early while getting access to card selection and card advantage like this later in the game while beefing up your creature in the process is actually really nice. So I think this is going to be a high pick in Limited, but the jury's out when it comes to Standard. And that brings us to our last card of the day, Possession Engine, and probably my favorite. Anybody that's followed the channel for a while or knows me in person knows that I love control magic. My favorite commander deck is Empress Galena, where it's just chock full of every single control magic variant known to man. But this one in particular, I think, is one of the better ones we've had that's standard legal in quite a while. This is a 5/5 artifact vehicle for 2 blue and 3, so it does cost 1 more than your traditional control magic. It also crews for 3 to become a 5/5, and when this vehicle enters, you gain control of target creature an opponent controls for as long as you control this vehicle. That creature can't attack or block for as long as you control this vehicle. So there are definitely downsides, right? The creature can't attack or block, but you can still use any of its activated abilities, any of its triggered abilities, and you can use it to crew the Possession Engine itself. The one downside about crewing the Possession Engine itself is if they have creature removal, they can't use it on the Possession Engine until it becomes a creature. You grab their dude, use it to crew your Possession Engine, now they use instant speed removal and kill your Possession Engine, get your dude back. So it is a little risk reward, a little bit scary. That being said, being able to take their best creature away from them is at least removal, right? It's at least removal that gives you upside of having a creature that can crew this, having a creature that can use its abilities, having access to a 5/5 vehicle as well, even if you're not using that creature to crew it. And I think the best way to use this is in a deck with a bunch of other vehicles, because if you can grab their dude and use it to crew your other vehicles, you kind of get the best of both worlds. You still get the value off of their creature, you still remove their biggest threat, and you're able to kind of attack with your best vehicle for free and you don't have to risk turning the possession engine into a vehicle and giving them access to getting back their guy by killing it with straight up creature removal. I also like that this is basically a control magic that is immune to enchantment destruction, unlike control magic. It is, you know, it does have a target on it when it comes to artifact destruction. There's a new way that they can get their guy back by killing this thing. But still, I think it's really cool. I think there's a lot of nuance to how you can use this. And I actually think there is some deck out there that this could be competitive in. The question is that deck competitive enough to be worth even playing in the standard meta? And that's really the question that's going to determine how good this card ends up being, because I think whatever the good vehicle deck ends up being, this card has a good shot of being a good card in that deck. It's just a matter of how good is that deck. Is it good enough that it becomes a part of the standard meta? And there's probably going to be a couple different vehicle decks. I'm definitely going to brew some crazy ideas that I'm working on myself, and we have not even come close to seeing all of the vehicles that are in this set, I'm sure. So a lot of potential for sure. But Possession Engine, awesome new variant to control magic, and I am excited to brew with it. And that's going to do it for today, guys. Thank you so much for checking out the video. It means a lot. Please like the video so it helps me get it out to so many more people. It means a lot. It helps the channel grow. I appreciate it so much. Subscribe if you're new so you never miss an upload. And come hang out with me during community night right now over on twitch.tv/quarantinecapricorn. Because if I'm alive and I'm breathing, I'm there and I'm streaming. I'll see you there, and I'll see you tomorrow for more spoilers. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck text, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.